Editing is such a big part of the writing process, but what if we don't know what to look for? In this video, I go through 4 of the common mistakes I see writers make so that you know how to look for them in your own work. Hey, if you're new here, I'm Megan. I'm a published author and professional writer. If you haven't subscribed already, consider doing so. I'd love to be your writing coach. Whether you're writing for school, for work, or creatively, these mistakes are so easy to make and really easy to miss when you're editing. So let's talk about them so that we don't keep making them. The first mistake I see writers make all the time is the classic comma splice. So let's take a look at an example and see if we can spot the comma splice. While walking down the street one afternoon, Roy found himself at an intersection he wasn't familiar with. He stopped and looked around. He wasn't sure how he got there. He'd never gotten lost before. He must have taken a wrong turn near the bank because somehow he'd ended up on the other side of town. Can you spot the comma splice? This is a comma splice because it's 2 independent clauses that are connected or spliced together with only a comma. So what do you need instead? You could connect the sentences with because. And just as a side note, you're not always going to need a comma before because, but typically if you're separating 2 independent clauses, you're going to want to have a comma and a conjunction. If you're using because and you're not putting in a comma, just make sure it doesn't add more confusion or ambiguity to the sentence. Back to the example. You could also separate the sentences into 2 separate ideas. They're both independent clauses, which means they can stand on their own as complete sentences as they are. So just separate them with a period, or you could connect them with a semicolon. Since the sentences are both independent clauses and they describe closely related ideas, a semicolon could be appropriate as well. So if you're wondering, how do I pick between them? This one clearly shows the cause-effect relationship between the ideas, but lengthens the sentence. This one breaks up the sentences for a shorter, choppier rhythm. And then this one keeps the smoother flow of the original version with a comma splice, but without the grammatical error. A lot of it depends on the other sentences around this one and their structure, and how you want it to read. For this example, since there's a short sentence before it and a sentence with because after it, I'd probably opt for the semicolon. Or, more likely, I'd adjust some of the other sentences so that I could use a version without the semicolon. Mostly because I think it's a bit odd to use semicolons, especially in fiction. I think, anyway. Feel free to think otherwise. Okay, so that was a comma splice. The next mistake I often see is the dangling modifier, and this is one you're really going to want to make sure you catch. So let's see if you can spot it. It was a cold and blustery day. Sharp and piercing, Roy felt the wind cut through his thin coat. Shuddering, he wrapped it tighter around himself and crossed his arms to keep it in place. He muttered grumpily as he turned around and headed back the way he came. Okay, so you probably found it pretty quickly, but here it is. Sharp and piercing, Roy felt the wind cut through his thin coat. The modifier here is sharp and piercing, but as it's written now, it describes Roy. Roy is sharp and piercing. But Roy isn't sharp and piercing, so it needs to describe the wind. A good rule of thumb is always to keep your modifying words and phrases as close to the subject they're modifying as possible. So here we would correct it in a couple of ways. Sharp and piercing, the wind cut through Roy's thin coat. Or maybe Roy felt the sharp, piercing wind cut through his thin coat. Which version should you choose? I'd probably suggest the first one as it's a bit more direct and active. Instead of Roy feeling the wind itself is acting. Alright, that was dangling modifiers. Now it's on to the third mistake I commonly see, and that's inappropriate tone. So when it comes to tone, you really want to think about who your audience is and what you're writing. What's it for? Inappropriate style might be another way to think about this. Okay, so for example, let's say we're writing the description of a product for an upscale clothing shop. Which option would you say has the more appropriate tone? It's not hard to pick, right? It's the first one. And of course it is, because that's a description from Ralph Lauren. You really want to make sure you're writing for your intended audience. It's the same if you're writing for children, for teens, for a particular company or a particular genre. You always want to make sure your tone and style are appropriate. I find when writers make this mistake, it's usually because they're writing too casually or they're writing in a more conversational tone, kind of like how they would speak. And that can be fine if you're writing your own story or a more casual blog. But if you're writing for Ralph Lauren, you have to write like Ralph Lauren, not like yourself. Okay, so on to the fourth mistake. This is subject-verb disagreement. Basically, our subjects and our verbs need to agree. So as writers, we have to work on our conflict resolution skills and help them communicate more effectively. But this can be tricky when sentences get more complex or introduce more than one noun. So let's look at some examples. First example, the use of any technological devices are strictly prohibited. So the thing that this one does wrong is it connects the verb to devices instead of to use. One easy way to check for subject-verb agreement is to take out the middle pieces and connect the subject to the verb more directly. So in this case, the subject is the use, The verb is. Is, are, to be, basically. So in this case, if we cut out the middle, that would make it the use are strictly prohibited. See how that clearly sounds wrong? So it should be the use is strictly prohibited. The use of what? The use of any technological devices is strictly prohibited. So much better. The second example, my dog, along with all his favorite squeaker toys, seem to follow me from room to room. So this one's tricky because there are multiple nouns going on. There's a dog, there's toys. Which one's the subject? Is it my dog? Is it my dog and his toys? So squeaker toys can't follow someone from room to room. Also, they're enclosed in commas, setting them apart as parenthetical information or information that could be removed without significantly changing the meaning of the sentence. So if we take that phrase out, what do we have left? We have, my dog seemed to follow me from room to room. Again, the mistake becomes a lot clearer. So we change it. My dog, along with all his favorite squeaker toys, seems to follow me from room to room. Now you know 4 of the common mistakes I see writers make. Whether you're writing a story, a blog post, a personal essay, now you know some things you can look out for. And hopefully, as you edit, you'll be better equipped to pinpoint these mistakes and know how to fix them. As always, thank you so much for taking time to talk with me about writing today. If you haven't already, like and subscribe. We're trying to get to 500 subscribers by the end of the year, and I think we can do it. I hope you have a great day and happy writing.